you. Okay, thank you, Tracy. Nice to see all of you, such as it is. It's a pleasure to be able to tell you some things about my career path. I do have some PowerPoints that I'll get to in just a moment, but again, just want to say, I think I know most of you who are joining, but obviously there's some of you that I've never met, but I hope to get a chance to meet you when we all get back. So I did speak with Han earlier about just kind of what she expected and what people would want. And she mentioned a few things. And so I've kind of tailored the talk around that. And it's going to be much less about my research or research findings than about my experiences at LBL. So I'm going to try to impart to you, elements of the culture and lessons learned by me very personally at LBL. And by the way, I've just had such a great time at LBL. I've been here for 31 years or so, and so I hope that comes across in the talk. But before we get there, we're going to have to start with a few earlier things. So let's get to that. I assume you're all seeing my screen.
Yep.
So LBNL experiences, again, is the kind of the main theme here. So we have to start somewhere, though, and I was born in 1961 at Kaiser Hospital on Geary Boulevard in San Francisco. So unlike so many of us at LBL who are from all around the world, from exotic places, I'm really quite a local. Here's a photo of me raring to go, probably just over, well, maybe about 3 years old or so. And what I'm thinking about there is all the hiking I want to do, all the backpacking I want to do, all the sports I want to play, all the skiing I want to do. And so those elements will be woven into this to some degree and how that helped to shape my career. I had 2 older brothers shown here. I'm there in the middle, 3 of us there with our dog. And as I say, we had a great childhood growing up, a lot of travel, a lot of adventures, even traveling in 1965 to Europe, trips to Mexico, Canada, all across the country in a camper repeatedly. So we really did a lot of things branching out from our youth there. Now, one interesting kind of funny thing, I hope, this year, 1961, I want to put that in perspective for you. When Barack Obama was president, there were conspiracy theories about whether or not he had actually been born in the United States. Some of you may remember. And when his birth certificate was finally produced, I looked at it and I just thought, my gosh, I mean, the whole form and everything looks exactly like mine. So for reference, he and I are just about the same age, just a few months apart. I'm a little bit older than he is. And my birth certificate looks exactly like his. And one of the reasons I know that, again, weaving this theme in, is through soccer. I played a lot of soccer as a kid, and I was put in charge of my birth certificate at a very early age because I always needed it to join leagues with different age categories. And so here we are, my friend Barry O with Curt O. And I can tell you, there's no Photoshop used in that whatsoever. That's a 100% genuine cardboard cutout of Barack Obama.
Fantastic.
Okay, so onward to my childhood in high school. I'm hearing. Oh, someone could mute.
Bianchi, can you mute, please? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So advancing a little bit into high school, I went to Tam High over here in Mill Valley, where I still live. I took just kind of general college-bound classes. Kind of the main thread here is that our high school had a computer. And so this was in the mid to late 70s. It was not that common. And we had good math teachers, et cetera. So I took a course in basic programming. And as you can imagine, this was nothing like today, but it was very important to me to sort of get into programming and understand what computers could do. AP classes existed, as I recall, but I never took any. It never came up to take an advanced placement course. So for whatever reason. Well, let me say a few more things about this high school. There's a little photo of it. We have a really eclectic group of graduates from Tam High. So It opened in 1908, and that first person there, William L. Patterson, was actually an African-American. Starting high school in 1908, he became an attorney, close friend of Paul Robeson, and this kind of national leader against racial oppression. So it's very unusual. He was the son of a cook in Mill Valley in the earliest days. I'll skip the next one. She's just an actress, but I thought it was really funny looking at the third one there, George Corey, the composer of I Left My Heart in San Francisco, a famous song, maybe kind of old, but some of you may have heard it. I can skip the next two, but let's go to Joe Breeze. Some of you may be interested to know that, a guy who claims to be the inventor of the mountain bike actually graduated from Tam High, has his bicycle there in the Smithsonian. Another actress from Apollo 13, I kind of knew her brother. Now I want to get to probably our most, at least in some circles, our most famous alumnus, and that's Peter Shore. Okay, so I knew him, not a friend. He was a little older, but I knew him, lived in my neighborhood. He was the developer of what's called Shore's algorithm, which is basically a theorem about factorization of numbers, and it's kind of the underpinning of quantum computing. And so we take great pride, some of us, in knowing that Peter Shore graduated from Tam High, and I have good memories of him. In my class was Ann Killian. Any Bay Area locals may know him, writing about the 49ers, and so she's a sports columnist in the Bay Area. I knew her quite well, even going back to junior high. Now, another character is Adam Stelzner. He had quite a sordid career at Tam High. I never knew him when I was there, but he's actually an engineer at JPL and quite responsible for that sky crane landing system that some of you may have seen for the rovers, that very advanced kind of hover with the lowering of the rover. So he's very famous at this point for his work on the Mars projects. And finally in this list is Tupac Shakur. So again, a very eclectic list of people graduated from this high school. And that's me in 1979 graduating. You might notice the gown is just completely wrinkled and old, and it's the same gown my two brothers wore graduating from the same high school before me. Okay, so let's go on to college now. So there's a thread here about soccer. Sebastian knows this well, but I played a lot of soccer, and this ended up coming in very handy. This is our high school team. I'm there up in the top row. It's actually kind of hard for me to see because it's blocked by you guys, but I'm the third from the right standing. And so soccer was a big deal for me. And when it came time to apply for college, one of the things a lot of us did was we only applied to University of California campuses, and we could apply, again, nothing was electronic, but we would apply to all 9 campuses and simply rank them. And my first choice was UC Berkeley. It's where a lot of us wanted to go, and I intended to play soccer there, but I just wanted to get in on my own merits. Well, I wasn't accepted to Berkeley. I was accepted to UC Santa Cruz. And so this was sort of a shock, but okay, what am I going to do about it? They were trying to really up the enrollment at UC Santa Cruz at that time. It was a perfectly good school, but it was not my first choice. So I had a decision, and this was kind of funny. I needed to appeal my acceptance. Okay, so I was accepted somewhere, but I had to appeal it and then try to go in and try for a different place, like UC Berkeley. So this is where soccer came in. The coach at UC Berkeley had seen me play before, and even though I hadn't appealed to him to get in on my first try, I just thought I could do it on academic merit. In those days, I actually called him up after this lack of acceptance to Berkeley, and he was all too happy to, quote unquote, put my name on a list. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I just went back to my life. And about 2 weeks later, I had an acceptance letter from UC Berkeley, not a word about soccer or anything, but clearly soccer had allowed me to get into UC Berkeley. So starting there at Cal, very rigorous, just as it is today, maybe not as rigorous, but very difficult. And I found myself needing a math tutor for calculus. And, this is just sort of the serendipitous sort of advice you get from people you never expect. I had not really started thinking when I would start taking physics. I always thought it would be when I was a sophomore or so, but he said, no, it's a 5 course. We had the quarter system in those days. So there were 5 different courses of physics to take. And he said, no, you need to take that, starting in the winter of your first year. So I said, okay. So that's what started me off in the physics courses. And that was just great advice, totally unexpected. Something I was totally ignorant about in terms of when I should start that, but it worked out very well in the end to get a whole lot of physics, math, and chemistry all out of the way before I was really going to start my actual major. Now, another thing I did right away, no one advised me about this, I knew I wanted to do it, was I took Fortran. And in those days, we were using punched cards. So again, a very different sort of thing, not as common. But I was super interested in computing and took the Fortran programming course. It was very tough, I thought, but did as well as I could. And I also had summer jobs 2 years in a row in a computer center. So just for the younger people here, in the olden days, computing didn't occur anywhere other than in a computer center. Okay, so we had central computing called timeshare, and if there was anything done that wasn't in the center, that was, again, connected by remote computers, and you had a dumb terminal that was connected to it by modem or by a wired network, but there wasn't anything like home computing. Everything was to do with the computer center. So what do you do in a computer center? You schedule jobs, basically. You deal with users, giving them refunds on jobs that abnormally end, write reports, plot usage percentages of the resources, all that sorts of things. Some people carry tapes around, mount tapes. Okay, that's all very archaic, but that's the sort of things we did. Okay, so in the 3rd year at Cal, I had a decision to make because I was playing soccer for the Cal team. I was on the varsity team, and I had to decide whether to keep playing soccer in the fall and miss taking field geology and put that off for a couple quarters, or take the geology class. So it was a pretty easy decision that my career was much more important than soccer. And so it was pretty easy for me to decide to quit playing soccer at Berkeley and keep that as a hobby and focus on my geology. So I took this class called Geology 5. So the geology and geophysics department at Berkeley was really nice. It was just like a small family. The entire university is very disorienting. It's so big. I did not live on campus. I lived in an apartment. So really having a smallish department was really important to get to know people better and work with them. And we had a really nice class. And so that was really a lot of fun and very enjoyable. So I love geology. So I wanted to continue in it. And here's maybe the first story about sort of a mentor experience. Without naming any names, I'll say that I was really interested in igneous petrology, which is the development of igneous rocks. These are volcanic rocks, things that existed as a molten magma at one point. And so I was looking around at graduate schools and went to the teacher of the igneous petrology class there at Berkeley, and I said, I'd like to get a letter of recommendation from you. And he said, oh, that's fine. That's great. Good. And he would write it. And I told him where I was applying, and that was great. And then I asked him, who else should give me a letter? What kind of person do you think would be good for my other letters? And he tells me, won't matter. So it's like, so this is the Berkeley sort of thing. He felt he had so much clout and so much influence that whatever he was going to say, good or bad, it didn't matter. His letter was the only one that was going to matter. So anyway, his letter must have been quite favorable, and I got into a lot of the graduate schools that I wanted to go to, and I had to decide then which one to attend. So just in between, before I get to that, I'll say that after I graduated from Berkeley, I did get a nice little job looking at gold prospects in Nevada and southeastern California as a field geologist. And again, this really exploited my interest in hiking and backpacking and being outdoors. So I chose to go to Princeton. And so I arrived there in the fall of 1984. And there's this nice old building there called Guillot Hall. Maybe some of you have been in it. I was up there in the 5th floor as a graduate student. had a really good time there. Again, it was a small department, great interaction with my colleagues, fellow grad students, et cetera. This was really challenging. People there had me taking a civil engineering graduate course in numerical methods. That was with Mike Celia. It was actually Pinder's course, but some of you may know these names, some of you won't, but trust me, they're very famous people in the area of numerical methods for solving partial differential equations. And then the advisors there had me taking chemical engineering. These were actually undergraduate courses, but for geology majors, taking even an undergraduate chemical engineering course was kind of new and very challenging. And these were just excellent classes and really made a strong impression on me about what direction I wanted to go in the very quantitative aspects of geology. So I was way out of my comfort zone in some of these, but just worked as hard as I could, and they ended up being very, very valuable to me. Then, near the end of my first year, I learned that my advisor, whom I had gone to Princeton to work with, was leaving Princeton for UC Santa Barbara. So 1 year, what's going on here? What do I do? So I had this big decision, another one, do I stay or do I go? So I would ask, I sought advice from all kinds of people. I'd say 90% of people told me I should stay. Okay, I should stay at Princeton, reputation, you're already there, the best people, blah, blah, blah. And I just mulled it over in my head. I was never comfortable. It was never an easy decision for me, but I was able to distill it down into this one question, and that is, if this person, it's Frank Sparrow was my advisor, if this person had not been at Princeton, would you have gone to Princeton? And the answer was no, I wouldn't have gone to Princeton. I really went there to work with Frank Sparrow. So I said, I'm going to UC Santa Barbara. And trust me, there's nothing bad about Santa Barbara. You can see the nice banana tree there over on the right. This is a windowless building that I ended up working in UC Santa Barbara, even though if you turned 180 degrees from here, you just about see the Pacific Ocean. I mean, a gorgeous place. So there's nothing bad about going to Santa Barbara inherently, but it didn't have this reputation that people thought was so important. But again, for me, it was the person I'm working with that's so important. And so this gets to sort of a bit of advice, something that I found works, and that is you hitch yourself to someone who needs you. They look out for you, they're indebted to you, and they help take care of you. And furthermore, there's something sort of a corollary to that, maybe not a corollary, but something similar, and that is often too much independence is not necessarily a good thing. So the specific example I'll give is some of my graduate student colleagues had NSF scholarships. I've forgotten what it was called, but anyway, it was a very good fellowship that would pay your entire tuition and pay you some salary, et cetera. And those people were never tethered to anybody. You know, they could do whatever they wanted because they had these scholarships. And sometimes I saw those people kind of swimming around because nobody really, they weren't wedded to anybody. Nobody needed them because they didn't need anybody. And it is often a good thing to, again, hitch yourself to someone who needs you. This mentor-mentee relationship is really a win-win. Okay, so I went to UC Santa Barbara. I'm going to say a little bit about the work I do, but very, very very, very little. So the department there in Santa Barbara was quite highly ranked. They're very much striving for excellence, trying to improve their reputation. So it was really a nice place to land. They had a very strong field orientation. So many of the professors were really doing field projects, doing field work. The graduate students love doing field work. The weather in Southern California, as you all know, is excellent. So you can do field work just about year round. So there's a very strong orientation. I won't say any pressure, but it was just kind of expected. You know, if you're going to go to UCSB, you should really have a field project. Well, once again, maybe counter to the norm, I stayed with doing a purely numerical modeling project that I'd started at Princeton University. And the sort of underlying theme here that I've found helps for me is to keep hobbies separate from your job, keep hobbies separate from your profession. so I can keep my outdoor stuff, hiking, backpacking, exploring, skiing, etc., all that separate from what I need to do 5 days a week or whatever to earn money. So anyway, the project I was working on, let's see where I am. Let me back up a little just to show you on the right. What I worked on was the numerical simulation of the convection and in some cases the solidification of magma. So that's the molten rock that's underground before it erupts as lava. So this is actually a figure I had to take from someone who was actually a contemporary of me, and that's George Brigance. But this is a paper from their work. I really couldn't find anything nice and in color from my old days. Everything was black and white. But anyway, what you have is underground a bunch of processes going on of convection and sorting and stratification within a magma chamber. And then they're triggered and they erupt. And so on the surface, we see the deposits, the lavas solidified, flowing, exploding, et cetera. And what can you get out of those deposits in terms of interpreting what went on in the magma chamber? So that's kind of the overall question. And again, I was looking from the magma chamber perspective of what kinds of processes are going on to differentiate, to change the composition and the crystallization, et cetera, within a magma chamber. So that was numerical simulation. So in the first summer from Santa Barbara, I had the opportunity to go to an NSF-sponsored University of Minnesota Supercomputing Center course on basically supercomputing and linear algebra. And of course, I jumped on that, as did 2 other students in our Frank Spera group. That was, again, very influential, using the state-of-the-art supercomputers in those days. The NSF sponsored 5 of these across the country. One of them was in Minnesota, and they were looking for users. Being on the sort of the leading edge of this work, we often had allocations of free computer time, and we were just running jobs all the time. And so computing, again, being the underlying thread. My research at that time was running a commercial finite element code called 2D-PEP on this magma problem. And you can only go so far with a commercial code, I would say. There's a lot of things we could do, but a bunch of things we couldn't do. And so later I coded my own simulator using the simpler algorithm. That's Patenkar's algorithm. Some of you may have seen that book, very clearly illustrated in the textbook, fairly easily coded. Not that good at converging, but nevertheless, I wrote that up for solidification and convection. And that's a case shown here from an older paper, just to look at the science for a second. If you look at A and B, those are 2 different ways that this system can be formulated. On the left, it's a continuum type model. That's a velocity profile by shown by the solid curve. And if I do it in a sort of continuum mode, I basically have a variable viscosity that's modeling the presence of crystals. That's on the left. If I do it in a 2-phase mode on the right, I have crystals with a liquid or a silicate melt that flows between the crystals. So that's the 2-phase model. So we put together a hybrid model of that, again, using the simpler algorithm. So, and then that was the basis for a remote postdoc after I moved back to Berkeley. I'll spare you all the details of moving back to Berkeley, but I'll get to some of them in a moment. But I just want to say that kind of the theme that I'll comment about later is how, you really have to kind of curate your own career, and not always are mentors doing everything for you. So things were really kind of languishing. I was working and we were producing papers and attending conferences, but I was really thinking, I need to finish at some point. So it really took me telling my advisor at Santa Barbara when I was going to finish, and he accepted that. But if I hadn't said anything, who knows how long it would go on. So take control of your own future when you need to. Sort of related to that also, after I finished, I did apply for a few jobs. I was thinking I would get an academic job. Igneous petrologists aren't really in demand for anything other than academic jobs, a super interesting field. But I was so naive, unbelievable. I applied for these posted jobs, University of Washington, seems to me there might have been one more, and then a couple of sort of not national lab jobs, but more like consulting jobs with very little input, very little advice from anyone. Totally naive, and got just almost zilch response, and certainly no interviews, no nothing. And I was just so naive. I mean, I've come to learn that, it's not just a matter that every institution or company hiring has a super responsible hiring committee that's going to necessarily get back to all the applicants. I mean, you really have to communicate with them outside of your application, phone calls, emails, et cetera, to make it work on a human level. And so this was kind of an eye-opener that nobody had advised me any other way. But particularly for academic jobs, I mean, it's known who's going to be applying well before applications are arriving. So all that has to happen in the background. I didn't know any of that. So there I was, moving back to Berkeley, continuing to work for my advisor. Again, it was a great thing doing programming and running the code from my apartment there in Berkeley. But I knew that just couldn't go on forever, and I really needed to look for a slightly more permanent job. I knew just up the hill that there were really good people in geothermal energy, and that's kind of the most closely related field to igneous petrology, given my work with magma and heat transfer, et cetera. So decision, try to get a job at LBNL. Okay, so that was pretty much of a no-brainer. Yes, I would do that. I, having learned from those very naive applications that I had sent in earlier, I knew it was really important to get some solid information from trusted and informed friends. So when I say informed, people who knew something about LBL. So I did know some people up there and was able to talk to them before, applying, et cetera, before doing this, that, and the other thing. And so that was really helpful to really understand what the division, the Earth Sciences division was up there. I did all that. I contacted Karsten Proust directly. I think I did that by phone. I was, as I put together this talk, I couldn't remember whether I emailed him or called him. We were doing emails in the mid 80s from UC Santa Barbara. It became, very common by the late 80s. But I just have a feeling I called him up actually just to make sure. And so he said, sure, come on up, blah, blah, blah. So gave a talk and started a postdoc there in 1990. Let me just say a few things before I get to some others about being a postdoc there. My experience was just so good. I was really impressed by the respect that external people, I guess, gave me as a postdoc at LBL, and that started with professors down on campus. We would have various projects and we'd want to consult with them about something, and I never thought I would really get to sit down with them and speak to them, and it was just completely different. They were super willing to speak to me and super willing to give time and teach me things, and so it was just such a pleasure. I felt like, having the LBL affiliation as a postdoc was really opening doors and granting me a lot of access to people. Now, there was some culture shock in the division. For me, anyway, coming from a regular academic department where it's really about teaching and it's academic, igneous petrology, certainly. There's a really strong engineering emphasis that suited me fine, but it was just a shock to me to experience that so much. Paul Witherspoon, the founder, was primarily an engineer. That's how he would describe himself, I think. And so people were really engineers. Again, it suits me fine, but I just wasn't really expecting it. This was really a shock. I mean, it was 1990. There were Macintoshes around in those days. It had been introduced, remember, in 1985, I think, the Super Bowl, the famous commercial. And Princeton was loaded with little Macs, and UC Santa Barbara was loaded with little Macs. And I get to LBL in 1990, there's not a single Mac in sight, at least in Earth Sciences. There were mostly dumb terminals, glowing green, sitting on all the cubicle desks connected to the mainframes, which were a bunch of Unix machines. And, I knew how to use that environment. I was fine, but at home, I had a color Mac, sitting down in my apartment in Berkeley. So I had much better visualization capabilities at home. So for my simulations, I was using the NCSA software that was from the University of Illinois, and making my plots and doing contouring and things, usually in the evenings. And at one point, let me see if I actually put a bullet here. No, I didn't. At one point, I actually had Karsten Bruce and Nigel Quinn come to my apartment. We took off from LBL and, got in the car and went down the hill because I just had to show Karsten, what the rest of the world was and how we had these capabilities. And so I think they were both really impressed. And a week later, so Karsten said, put in a PO and we'll get you a Mac. And there were other experiences by other people along these same lines of really trying to bring some new things into the division. So I'll bring that up later if there's time. I really couldn't find any good color plots, again, of this old work. It's all in black and white. So not much to show here on my research. The bottom plot, yay, it's in color because it's from a paper that I'm just submitting right now, or I just submitted the revision. And I think in light of the time, I'm going to spare you all details about it. So let's just keep moving more on my LBL lessons learned rather than research. So getting to LBL culture for a minute. This is an amazing institution with such an amazing background. And if you haven't read some of the books that are shown on the right here, I really encourage you to do it. It's just so incredible. The thing was really built from Lawrence on this idea of team science rather than the single PI model. And I've just found that to be very enjoyable. And you get to work with people and, often university departments, the full professors with their so-called labs, almost discourage interaction. But here it's just very different and really take advantage of this. Support staff also at LBL is just excellent, and it really pays to nurture those relationships. What the support staff wants is responsiveness from you. They want you to respect them, and they can do so many things for you in terms of helping your productivity and dealing with all the myriad of challenges that arrive from let's say from not necessarily the discipline of your work, but all of the very practical, logistical, administrative aspects of the job. They're there to support you. And anyway, so the support you give to your colleagues, I feel you really get back. Now, this was a lesson learned for me. You will at some point get a phone call. Someone from somewhere will be asking if you can work on some XYZ project. And often you'll think, oh my gosh, I'm way too busy. I've got this, that, and this, that, and the other thing. I don't think I can do that. Well, that's not the answer. You need to always think when someone's asking you about this, think the question is, can LBNL work on this? Okay, not necessarily you. So as you can tell, this was a lesson learned. I gave the wrong answer once, and boy, did I get raked over the coals. So the questions coming to you, you're always thinking about your colleagues, you're thinking about the lab, you're thinking about, look, you might even want to hire someone to do the job that someone's asking you to do, but think about it as the team, think about it as the lab as a whole, not just you personally. Accept that proposal calls will be coordinated. Okay, we get some calls for proposals. I mean, not enough. There's often kind of this groan when the idea comes that somebody's going to be, organizing these, and you can't act like a single PI and just go after yourself and blah, blah. But just accept that as many times as you may think this is a hindrance, it's actually really helpful. To coordinate and make sure you're not competing with one of your colleagues. Actually, make sure that there's an LBNL sort of polished, outward-looking response to these calls. People are working for you. This sort of relates to this quote that I think comes in handy in this context, and that is genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So often these ideas, we've all been to the same been through the same programs, had often similar teachers and the same subjects using the same textbooks. It's often the case we'll come up with the same ideas. it's not the case someone's stealing your idea. It's a common idea. And what really matters is the work that gets done on it, how to actually make an idea come to something, how to make it fruitful. So that's related to the proposal calls. I threw this in here, just an observation in our culture that LBNL really values these managerial skills. I mean, you see it in the salary structure. But the reason is that they're actually rarer at LBNL than the scientific skills. You know, we get this absolutely top-notch scientific staff, but often the people who are really good at kind of, you know, managing stuff and working the phones and blah, blah, you know, there are actually fewer of those than there are the really skilled science and technical people. So LBNL values those. So if you have aspirations for that, what I mean is, you know, you'll see the salary is actually very high for managers, and it's really something that they value. Okay, I threw this one in here. Sometimes the answer walks in on 2 feet, because I've just seen this before, that often we will have a project with some challenge, or we'll have something that's that we'd like to work on, that we can't work on, maybe relates to that earlier thing I said about, you know, if someone asks and says, can LBNL work on this? Can you work on this? You may not be able to at that moment, but with the right person, just identifying the right person, that's the answer. It's walking in on 2 feet. I've just seen this repeatedly, that talking to people, learning what they know, their backgrounds, you just won't believe that sometimes the answer is right in front of you, and it's going to be embodied by somebody at LBNL or very nearby. Okay, now I've got a long list of these, and so I can kind of adjust the time. I can see I've gone way over what I wanted to, so I'll try to keep these a little bit quick, but these are kind of my lessons that I've learned. Again, my experience, it's just fantastic working at LBNL. I feel like we're always on the steep part of the learning curve. There's nothing I like more than getting a phone call where someone's asking about something that no one else can do, basically. Can you guys work on it? Can you do it? The answer is yes, we can do it. So we learn. We, as a person here working, you want to, you know, aim for what you are best at, what you like most, but the time comes when you need to fill a need, and you need to be flexible in what you do. I'll stop there just to say that in my case, it was risk assessment. I never did anything in risk assessment in graduate school. We had a need for people to work in risk assessment. So yes, okay, we can try to work in risk assessment. What can we do in there? All of a sudden, there's people showing up. Tom McComb, Bob Budmetz, these people know risk assessment. They are mentoring us, they're teaching us. So we grow in these areas. It wouldn't have been productive to have said, oh, we don't know anything about risk, we can't help. We can help, and then we can grow in that area. A volunteer, when you know, questions come up, can you work on this? Are you available? The answer usually should be yes. Try to keep yourself with a lot of things going, a lot of options available. And that's the last one. At least for me, I like to keep a lot of pots on the stove. Sometimes things don't go well. You know, something will get burned, and okay, fine, you've got 3 other things that are good that are going well. So I like to keep a lot of things cooking, and good things will come out of some of them, maybe not all. This one I have a lot to say about. So this is, again, back to the say yes and accept some chaos and discomfort, because often these pay off. So I have a few examples of these. The first one I will give is, at one point, you know, Sally Benson walked around and said, Curt, we'd like you to write a section for this chapter, a section on geologic carbon sequestration for a chapter in what? What's it for? Oh, it's for the IPCC. Okay, well, there's no project, there's no funding. I'm super busy with other things, but she's asking me for a chapter. Okay, so I write up a chapter, I hand it to her. This ended up being the basis for the 2007 IPCC Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, I don't mean my piece in particular, but you know, the whole chapter, the whole book was, again, part of the IPCC, which was then awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Now, if I had just acted very selfishly and just thought about my deliverables and what I had hoped to do in the next 2 weeks rather than working on that, I would have said no. It really pays off to take a risk and say yes. The other example of this was the Macondo well. We were watching that. This was the blowout in the Gulf in 2010, I guess, 2010. And we were watching that with trepidation, but with great interest. No one was really calling us to help. We knew we could help. It was like some afternoon, maybe a Thursday or Friday, Barry Freifeld comes to my office and says, he's gotten a call. And Steve Chu, by the way, was the Secretary of Energy at that point. And he's gotten this phone call, can we help? And what does Barry want? He wants me to, stay late and do this, that, and the other thing. Well, I carpooled, so I'm going to have to, I might have had my carpoolers drive my own car home. I can't quite remember one way or another. I'm not going home that evening. Barry loans me his truck, so I drive his truck home, that evening. Anyway, it's very chaotic. It's not exactly what you expected to do on that day, but it ends up being something that's very valuable in the end. I mean, we contributed to that. We ended up getting awards for it, et cetera. So sometimes these things that seem kind of painful and inconvenient pay off. There's more examples, but I'll keep going. Okay, this is kind of one that I think I learned early. I just couldn't believe that there often wasn't a lot of praise at LBL, okay? That often you do something you're so proud of, and okay, good, everything's done. And so I learned that really the absence of criticism is really quite high praise. And some of you might want to quibble with that, but that's been my experience. If you do something and no one basically criticizes it, you did a very good job. Sometimes some things would happen, and this was internally much less than externally, but you just find someone very angry with you and you couldn't really figure out why. And I've just learned over the years that what angers people the most is when you step on their toes. Okay, so what that means is if you somehow appear to be trying to, hone in on their project, work in their exact same discipline, and somehow go over them in some way, this is what really angers people the most. And so learning how to, if you're going to have to work on something, learn how to collaborate, how to find the niches and the places where they're not working is very important. Don't ever make it appear that you're somehow going to be stepping on their toes and displacing them. That nothing makes people madder than that. This, I think I referred to earlier with my own experience. You really do need to take care of yourself to some extent. The management structure is at LBNL. It's doing its best, but it's never going to be perfect. So there are times when you really have to kind of step in and make suggestions to your supervisor and make sure people know, what's going on, because they can't keep track of everything. They're extremely busy also. I think Don DePaulo once gave a talk about this, and he said basically, you have to maintain your CV. You have to basically let people know every once in a while what you're doing and what your successes are, because others just can't possibly have the bandwidth to keep track of you and necessarily elevate you the way that maybe actually should be done. Okay, this is one of my mantras here. So when I take up a paper to review or something of my own, computer program, et cetera, you just put before you the challenge of find the mistake. Just find it. It's your job. You have to find it. And when you find it, okay, it's a mistake, but you're actually celebrating because you found it, okay? You do not want someone else to find a mistake in something you did. You want to find it. And that's why it's so fantastic when you find it. And this extends a little bit to small groups, but just be happy when you find a mistake. It's not a bad thing. You found it. The ones that are bad are the ones you don't find. So you have to look. Make time for writing and publishing. You all know this, but what is really appalling sometimes is sometimes our sponsors don't care. They will fund us to do something at LBNL and they don't really want the paper. They just wanted the result. They wanted a report. They wanted the answer. Don't let that stop you. You have to care. You have to publish. You have to make something that is a document that records this effort. It's on your CV. No one can take it away from you. Put out the effort to do it. I've actually had projects where money, as soon as we came up with the answer, the rest of the money was taken away because it wasn't in our scope to write a paper. We said we're going to write, nope, you're not going to write a paper. The rest was taken away. Well, you find your own time to write that paper. You have to care. In terms of the team science, you have to prioritize your colleagues' needs for reviews, for edits, for work products, for deliverables, etc. You may have a paper to review for a journal. You may have 2 papers to review for a journal. Those are lower priority than your colleagues' stuff. I never want to have them coming to my office, whatever, today, and say, Curt, whatever happened to this that I asked you to do? I never want to hear that. I prioritize everything for my colleagues first. Get it done so they're not waiting for you. Now, when you are editing and reviewing your colleagues' papers, I hope all of you do this, but I learned it from Karsten. Don't just make some vague suggestion about a paragraph needing to be modified or something. Make the edit. Make it exactly the way you want it as the reviewer or the editor. If they don't like it, they'll change it, but don't leave it vague. Just avoid obscure suggestions. You just want to directly change it. And if, like I said, if they don't like it, they won't accept it, but don't leave them guessing. Now, this one people may quibble with, but I have observed it's much more about the product at LBNL than it is the process. All right, so boy, I'm short on time here. I've just felt that people generally, our sponsors, have cared about what you produce rather than the process. Going fast here, we're all better editors than writers. Back to soccer, just score an ugly goal. Don't expect perfection. Just write a first draft. You can edit it. You can modify it. Gosh, I have a story here, but not enough time. So when it comes to responding to the reviews that you get on your paper, just keep in mind what your goal is. It's to publish the paper. It's not to punish or humiliate the reviewer who didn't understand it. It's to publish the paper. This is the biggest stress in my life, always came from being responsible for a deliverable that I didn't control. And this mostly extended to multi-lab projects. But if there's something that you are responsible for and you don't control it, avoid that situation. Just don't let it happen, because other labs can drag their feet, or other people that you don't control can be slow, and it causes so much stress. Memory fades. So in my work with computer simulations, I always had a notebook on paper in those days, but anyway, I have written notes, chronological. Every computer file basically I ever generate is organized by date. I can find it. I coordinate it with my notebook. I can figure out what it was and is. Okay, I'm just getting to the end now. When you're stuck on something, don't just sit there, work on something else. And Paul Witherspoon said this. He would often say, while you are resting. So while you're resting, do this. While you're resting, do that. And I just want to end with Witherspoon again. As I said, there was some, culture shock. Engineering was sort of the task, the job. People worked incredibly hard. I know you still do, I do, we all do, but there's still a lot of fun and a lot of humor. So I carry this business card with me. This is Paul's, on the other side of his business card, it has this units conversion. And for hydrologists, we know some of these numbers, but it obviously has a lot of humor here. He's always having fun. So he kept that Ethiopian buckets per hectare per lunar month, just to keep it all in perspective. Okay, I said way too much or too slowly, but thanks everyone. I hope you got something out of that.
That was great, Curt. Thank you very much. I do have a question. Where was that last picture taken?
Oh, I think you'd ask that, Tracy. So it's along the John Muir Trail. It's actually an unnamed little lake, but it's not too far from Bench Lake.
Okay, got it. Thanks. So it's open up for questions. You can either raise your hand in your Zoom, or if you want to speak up and ask a question, we are open. Can't see everybody on the page.
Thank you, Curt, for the fantastic talk. So many wise comments. So I have one question. Can you comment more about the management skills that you mentioned?
Comment more. So, a lot of that, I guess, is just the desire to do management. I mean, so many of us, we really get our mojo, our dopamine comes from, in my case, we get kind of addicted, frankly, to like programming. We get addicted to the pleasure that we get when we come up with an answer. And so often kind of dealing with people and, like, or strategic plans. I mean, I'm so impressed by Susan and by all of the managers who are able to put together strategic plans. I mean, to me, that's just a very difficult, and I don't know, I don't get the satisfaction from it. So I don't aspire to do it, but that's the kind of managerial skill that the lab really values. And again, it's just not something that we all have. So number one is, do you have the desire or the ability to do that kind of thing? And if you do, you'll have, you'll be in demand.
To me, I feel like it's more and more difficult to manage the science and the time and the project and also maybe the finance. So it's getting more and more difficult. And at the same time, maybe the people in the projects and so on.
Yeah. That's something to always keep in mind. I mean, I think that's always good feedback. And I don't think that's the first time we've heard that. And any comment on that, Curt? I mean, it's just a matter of, you've seen it probably change over many years. But it has gotten more difficult to manage in some ways, hasn't it?
I'm not sure about that. I can't say. Maybe things are a bit bigger. We have more people. It's changed, but I can't say that for sure.
And a quick comment, if I can. This is Sebastian. Berkeley Lab has a very unique position regarding the other national labs. It's one of the few labs where managers are first scientists. Most of the other national lab managers are managers. And so maybe Mengsu, that's why this appears to be a little bit more challenging for us, because we are scientists first and not managers, most of us anyway.
Right.
So just that comment.
I mean, Mengsu, I think, and I'm going to speak, Lisa, maybe you can say something about this too. I mean, I think the managing the financial part, we have fantastic program ops analysts who, really want to help and support the scientists. They know they're so good. And the more you can develop a relationship with them and utilize them, I think that might help with the financial side. Managing the funding in terms of how it's allocated and all that is a different story, I think. But certainly, for the administrative financial types of details, it would be good to make good friends with your POA or admin. Anybody else have a question? Oh, Charu, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to, one of the things I really admire about you, Curt, is the breadth of your research. And I have to say that when I never knew about Berkeley Lab, someone said, check it out. And I went and checked out their website. And one of the first things I saw was your video on carbon sequestration, which kind of inspired me to look a little bit more into Berkeley Lab as a place I wanted to come to. Just something I want to mention. And, you mentioned about how you had, there are so many different opportunities that come up, take it and go for it. And one of the challenges is sort of the extent of knowledge that you need to know to go for new opportunities and how you get up to that learning curve. And can you talk a little bit about perhaps your experience with, say, joining NRAP or, even carbon sequestration as something that you hadn't worked on? It was a new up and coming topic, and then you have to jump into it because that's the, new thing that's getting funded, and how one would go about, starting to address that learning curve.
Yeah, NRAP won't be a good example. Well, first of all, Tracy, what are we doing about time?
Well, we're getting close. It's a little bit before. We have 3 or 4 more minutes. We should finish probably by 1, but the question can go over a little bit if you'd like.
Okay, so the NRAP isn't really relevant because I already knew risk assessment. But on the other one, when Sally came in with geologic carbon sequestration, there too, we knew a lot about all of the edges, maybe not the center, but we just knew hydrology and we knew 2-phase flow. And so I'm not sure these are good examples. So let me try to give you, maybe just more generally, it's that especially today, we have access to so much information so easily that we can really learn, I think, a lot very, very quickly. So if a new area comes up, just get on the web, and in the olden days, we were in the library. Anyway, today you can just learn so much. So again, I guess my advice is just not to be afraid of it, to take the risk that you can in fact get up to speed quite quickly, and then take advantage of the human resources, whether they're on campus or at the lab or at some other place, to get yourself up to speed. That's all I can say. It's just not to sort of to have confidence that you can do it, and you will be able to do it.
Dipankar, you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Tracy. Hey, Curt. So I was wondering if you can comment a little bit on team science that was there back in 90s, and like how do you see like research has evolved from 90s to today, what we see?
I see the DOE is trying to get the labs to work together. You know, when Lawrence started, I think his concept of team science was, okay, the team will be at the lab. The team will be at the lab and maybe with some UC Berkeley people. But now the DOE is trying to get the labs to work together. And this has not been all that easy all the time. It still isn't, you know, we have a level of competition with one another sometimes, but the labs, again, in the NRAP and SMART and some of these other, they really want the labs to work together. So making that work, I'd say is a work in progress in itself. And I think it could probably be done better. I haven't thought a lot about it, but I think there are some ways it could be done better. It may be convenient that our recent working style of using Zoom, et cetera, is just, you know, now very natural. And so that skill and the ability to do that is not a barrier anymore as it used to be working across labs. But there's still something in the leadership elements that I find lacking often for these cross-lab collaborations. Just another one I'll throw out is how jarring, I'm sure some of you have experienced this, but how jarring it can be when leadership changes, you know, at another lab, for example, also the PI changes or something. And maybe if you were sort of embedded and at that lab, you would have known that that was coming. You would have known there were some adjustments that are going to be made, but when you're external to that, it's just like, oh my gosh, everything's just changed and you don't really know where the project's going anymore. So I think maybe the DOE in trying to get the labs to work together, maybe could think a little more about how the labs can work better together. Is there some sort of a structure or some sort of communications that could be slightly improved?
Great, thanks.
Okay, I think we were at time. You know, if anybody else has a question, I'm sure that Curt would be willing to talk with you offline. I don't want to keep everybody, it's 101, but we appreciate your attendance today. And I will, this was recorded, as I mentioned, I'll close, we'll be posting the recording in about 2 days. We usually convert it to a YouTube version and put it on our website. So more information will be coming about that soon. Okay. Thank you very much, very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.